Hello everybody, I'm Pontius Porcius, and welcome back again to Unexpected Awesome. About 6 or 7 odd years ago, I met a friend of mine. He recommended to me two things: that I should play Command & Conquer, and start reading a novel series. Not owning a computer at the time, I didn't end up playing Command & Conquer, but I did read the books. And to this day, I owe that man a debt of great gratitude for introducing me to such a rich and interesting world. Artemis Fowl is a softcore fantasy adventure novel by none other than Owen Colfer. It follows the exploits of an aspiring criminal mastermind from essentially a dynasty of Irish Moriartys. However, after his father attempts to go into legitimate business into the savage refuges of capitalist Russia, he finds himself on the unfortunate receiving end of an explosive device. So with his mother's mind broken by the sudden loss of her beloved husband, and desperate to gain the family's notoriety and restore its fortune, young Artemis embarks on an ambitious, highly accomplished criminal career of various heists and capers, with his planned magnum opus being a theft of gold from a civilization that many doesn't even know exists. After extensive research and a particularly legendary bout of blackmail, Artemis gets himself a copy of the guidebook to the entirety of the fairy civilization that lives at the center of the earth, and then proceeds to track down and abduct one of their elite members of their police force, the Leprechauns. His quarry turns out to be the ambitious yet self-doubting first female member of their organization, Holly Short. One night, after trying to prevent massacre of human beings at the hand of a feral fantasy creature to her commanding officer, Root chews her out and tasks her to go to Ireland to replenish her powers, where she's caught in a muscle-relaxant-laden bear trap of a ploy by a Fowl, who in turn, utilizing the intricate laws of their culture and their magic, commands Root to bring him a king's ransom in fairy gold. The fairy fuzz rock on up to his mansion and proceed to erect a time-freezing barrier around their home, which they try multiple ambitious ploys to free Holly and defeat Fowl, including but not limited to initially attempting to send a commando squad to incapacitate them, playing verbal chess with him to give them implied permission to enter his home without losing their magic powers, sending in a magicless convict to find out how he knows so much about their organization, as well as potentially free Holly herself. However, what the fairies have in technology and magic, Artemis makes up for in wit and preparedness. Utilizing scavenged fairy technology and a recently acquired knowledge of their culture, traditions, and magical abilities, he narrowly manages to outfox his fairy rivals at each turn, eventually pushing the game to the point where an ambitious and unscrupulous rival for Root's authority inside of the fairy police department, Cudgeon, decides to employ much more brutish methods to try to defeat Artemis, including sending in the feral creature that almost killed the human beings, as well as sending in nerve gas. However, through all of this, Artemis manages to find a loophole in which to not only save his mother's sanity, but also protect his bodyguard's life, his own life, and of course, free Holly, with a surprisingly generous caveat, giving up half the ransom that he initially asked for. The story itself is an incredibly adventurous and fun ride. However, within the simple confines of the narrative itself are a remarkable degree of opportunities that Colfer utilizes to the fullest to explore the setting, the characters, and the journey that they go through. The first largely worthwhile element of note is easily the world building. The human world of Artemis Fowl is disgusting, filthy, and slightly gritty. There's an anti-pollution message to the tone that you feel from the refuse-spewed streets of Saigon, the leaded metal hallways of Whalers, all the way to the surprisingly pristine Irish countryside of Fowl Manor. However, real world-building strengths come within the fairy world, where humanity is given a relatively wide degree of breadth in order to inhabit. The fairies all live at the center of the earth in a packed metropolis that feels one part utopia, one part RoboCop Detroit, and fantasy creatures are adapted wonderfully into the setting. Magic turns itself into cussing toads that roam the streets, gang wars break out between graboid-jawed dwarven theft rings and fire-wielding goblin drive-by squads, all of which is desperately attempted to be held in check by the Leprechaun police force, which with its presentation comes all the many well-executed hallmarks of a good police drama, including critiques on public funding, civilian misinterpretations of actual police authority and regulations, as well as the overall purpose and greater good of mobilized and armed authority figures. However, if there's any major tonal distinction of the subterranean fairy city, it's a disdain for human humanity, a view that humanity is almost like halfway intelligent rodents that force them out of their homes and purge everything they touch with poison. It's an incredibly interesting perspective that adds a layer of depth and humanity to the fairies, and that gives them an internal chasm that begins to be bridged with the relatively open-minded Fowl. Colfer doesn't stop with the considerable achievement of creating a surprisingly non-generic young adult softcore fantasy setting inside of a genre known for its standard nature. It's really his characters where the book shines, and not just the main characters, such as the coldly ambitious yet surprisingly humanly nervous criminal mastermind that is Artemis Fowl, but also his bodyguard and manservant Butler, who's struggling with an inner conflict of his loyalties and duty to the Fowl dynasty, as well as his concerns of how that's going to affect not only his own life, but the life of his relatively free-spirited sister. Then, of course, there's Holly. Holly starts out as a police officer rookie in an elite squad that doesn't think that she can do her job, and through a series of screw-ups, she initially appears to confirm their bias against her. However, through this unforeseen hurdle of being captured by Fowl, scrappily scheming, and eventually breaking out of her own cell and attempting to sabotage Fowl's plans, through eventual shared struggles against the machinations of Briar Cudgeon, she begins to find common ground with Fowl and discover not only humanity within herself, but also a degree of pride, self-confidence, and sharpened skills facing some of the largest challenges that she's ever faced at that moment. She's a dynamic female lead that doesn't require other characters to define her journey, and through hardship and struggle, experiments and eventually prevails in gaining her own freedom and starts to build a bridge of mutual understanding with initially her worst enemy. There's Commander Root, who initially comes off as nothing more than an angry police chief cliche from the 1980s, but as time goes on and he's forced to put his professional and personal neck on the line more and more for his extremely nervous protege, you start to see that he cares more about his officers than initially appears, and he simply wants to see them and his own civilization protected, while also struggling to maintain his sense of honor and fairness, especially in the face of this brand new concept of a human being that can face the fairies on their own turf with their own rules. And that's not even touching half of the great supporting cast, including the likes of one of the greatest comedy relief roguish scamps in all of fiction, and perhaps the greatest IT guy in all of young adult fiction in Fantasy Q. Needless to say, this story has everything: humanity, personality, suspense, and a 6.5-foot tall Russian man bludgeoning a 9-foot tall fantasy troll near to death in a suit of knight's armor. This is Pontius Porcius signing off.